I'm Melory Johnson, 26-year beauty veteran, fractional COS and strategist. Welcome back to Pretty Equity, where we tackle the real issues facing beauty founders and investors and bring you the answers from the experts behind the deals. If you've ever launched a product, you know there is one decision that not only touches everything at once, but can also break you fast. And that decision is price. Here's the reality. Most founders get it wrong and well before that product ever reaches the shelf. And not because they are careless, but rather because they're anchoring to the wrong number. Pricing decisions come from marketers or CFO types. But my guest today sees pricing from a vantage point most people never get. Kevin Herbert is the CEO of Upgrad'd Laboratories in the UK, where his team takes products from concept to consumer. Formulation, packaging, testing, compliance, manufacturing, storage, fulfillment, the gamut. And he has watched founders, including himself when he wore that hat, price themselves out of their own future. And this is exactly why I want to talk to him today. Kevin, welcome to Pretty Equity. I'm so excited to have you here.
Oh, nice to be on.
You posted something a while ago on LinkedIn that got me thinking, and that's actually why I reached out to you. You said that in beauty, more often than not, founders prepare or compare their start with somebody else's middle, right? And often they don't realize that that's what they're doing. And the place that mistake shows up first is, of course, in pricing. The pattern you described in your post is one I've watched play out for decades. And, mostly it's on the manufacturing and commercialization side. A founder gets their first product production quote, right? Applies the classic 8 by 10 times, that rule of thumb, and then locks in the retail price. An example, $3 to make, $30 on the shelf. And on paper, that's fine. In reality, not so much, right? So from your seat, Kevin, as the CM, as the lab, walk us through what you see when a founder comes to you with their first cost of goods and a retail price they already have fixed in their head. Where does that number actually come from, and why is that a trap?
Okay, so most people, when they come as a new founder, they're really coming most of the time as a product innovator. They've had a great idea. They've thought about, there's this gap in the market. I can do this, I can do that. And they approach it as a project engineer, as a project manager, and they're thinking about the product. So they kind of get all excited and they come, all the way along. They come with their idea, it gets developed. And it's not normally until the development phase is well underway and they start getting their first quotes back. But most founders, especially smaller founders, they're on a limited budget. It's either a side hustle or they've got some limited investment, so they haven't a huge amount of money. So they're always going to play small because also they don't know if their idea is going to work in the market either. So the initial kind of quotes they get are the small quotes. They're on the minimum orders. They're bouncing off minimum orders for ingredients. They're bouncing off minimum orders for packaging. The shipping costs and all are highly significant to the money they're spending. And so as a result, their costs are quite high. So they might be, say, $5 or $6 for a product. And that's their kind of base cost. And the mistake many founders make is they go, okay, it's $5 or $6 for a product, and it can go one of two ways. The first way is they go, well, I'm going to sell it direct to consumer, and so I'm going to sell it for $15, and that's a good price. I'm going to go for that. And that's one mistake that could be made. And the other way they go is they kind of look at a cost plus kind of pricing model, and they say, well, if it costs me $5, I want to make a certain amount of margin, and I'm going to do this, this, and this. And there's a kind of a rule of thumb where it goes from going from manufacturer to, say, retailers, which is kind of a 10x markup. So they say, well, it's $5, I'm going to sell it for $50. And in both of those scenarios, they can end up kind of either never getting any traction or getting some traction and a bit being capped. So for people who go, well, I can make it for $5 or sell it for 15, they can get some great traction at the start on their website. But as soon as they then go, well, I'm going to try and sell it through Amazon, or I'm going to try and sell it through Walmart, or I'm going to try and get it into retail, all of a sudden, they don't have enough margin. The retailer's turning around to them and saying, I want to buy it for $7.50. But it costs them five. Maybe, but then there's maybe a distributor in between there who's also going to take maybe a 50% margin, and now they want to buy it for $3. So that original pricing doesn't work. And then on the other side, there's people that have gone in, it's cost me $5, I'm going to sell it for 50. No one buys it. So they get no traction on their website. And when you're going to retailers and everything else, they want to see, good product, good pricing, but most of the time they want to see traction. And if you're not generating traction because your price is too high from the outset, you're stalled and your business will stall. So that's kind of the two big mistakes, and they're kind of like the opposite sides of the same coin of pricing at the wrong point, and basically building a product pricing based on where they are currently rather than where the business is going to be and where they want to be. So you get it a lot because a founder will come in and you'll give them some pricing, and then they go, you'll say, I don't know, it's $5 for this moisturizer. And then they go, but I can buy the moisturizer, almost identical moisturizer in CBS, and it's only $8. How can I compete? And that's literally it. You're comparing your kind of start with their end.
But the one thing that I do want to drive home, because this I think is something a lot of founders, especially new founders, don't understand, that your launch cost of goods is not the cost of the product at scale, right? It's the cost of proving that your product exists. So I want to actually just unpack that a little bit. What is actually inside a first production run that will not be there at volume? Because there's a difference. You know what I mean? Like once you're in scaling, it's a completely different ballgame. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly that. So obviously in all costs, there's fixed costs, there's variable costs. When you first launch, that is kind of like it's a ticket to play. It's not the end game result. So the first costs, they're fixed. It's things like, as I say, your ingredients are MOQ, your packaging's at MOQ, but your shipping is fairly fixed. It's fairly high relative to it. You've got your costs of development, your costs of testing, your staff costs, your own wages. All of these factors go into your initial costs, and they can be very, very high. As you scale, a lot of costs drop. So as you scale, things like packaging, the cost of packaging at, say, 1,000 pieces might be, say, 60 cents. When you get to 10,000 pieces, it might drop to, say, 53 cents. You get to 100,000 pieces, you could be down about 27 cents. It drops significantly at volume. And, as you go up and up and up, it drops more and more and more. And there is a cutoff point. It doesn't drop to zero. I wish it did, but it doesn't. But it does drop as it goes. And the same goes with ingredients. So ingredients drop in a similar way. And so does manufacturing process. So cosmetics are made in giant vats, big homogenizers. So you put all your ingredients in, you turn it on, it whirls around and makes some cosmetics. It takes the same amount of time to make 150 liters as it does to make a ton. It's the same amount of time. And a manufacturer will be charging you for that time. So your actual cost per unit at a ton is a fraction of what it is at, say, 150 liters. So these kind of variable rates will drop, and the fixed rates become less significant to your end pricing.
And I'm sure that machinery has a lot to do with it. Whether you're manual or automated, I mean, that has a lot to do with, with scaling. Once you reach a certain level, you can move on to different. I mean, I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, well, it does. Also, your choice of manufacturer can affect it as well. So if you're doing quite small numbers, you choose quite a small manufacturer because maybe a big manufacturer, you're below their MOQ. And they could be filling with semi-automatic hand fillers or even manual hand fillers. And they're quite cheap, but they can't scale because their costs never come down because wages are, dollars per hour. So you can only do so many units in an hour. So their costs never come down. As you scale, you can go to bigger manufacturers and you can use automation. And bigger factories have more and more automation and bigger lines. You can get more projects per hour out. So choosing the right manufacturer is also key, because if you choose the wrong manufacturer, it's going to stunt your growth and you won't be able to scale, and their pricing won't come down. So when they give you a quote for this is for 1,000, this is for 10,000, that 10,000 price is probably quite high because they can't themselves scale, and you're having that cost with them. So yeah, there are factors that really influence. You have to think about also your design of your product and your packaging. So if you design your box so it can be put by a cartoning machine, you can use a cartoning machine. But if you design your box and it's got kind of intricateness and there's inserts and this and that and the other, which require manual labor, when you come to scale, it'd be great when you're selling little volumes. But when you come to scale, all of a sudden there's no machine for that, or you have to pay some tooling and changes for, to alter a machine to do it. And it really affects your ability to scale and grow. So even that the very design of your products, you should always look about where do I want to be selling this in 5 years, and how do I design my product to be that 5 year product and not my I made 100 pieces in my kitchen table kind of product, which can't scale.
Look, I mean, I'm always saying to clients all the time, you can't choose your manufacturer without actually going into the facility yourself and walking the floor. Because here's the thing, not all manufacturers, to your point, can scale. Some
Yeah.
can, some can't. So where are you in 5 years? Maybe this is the right manufacturer for you, 4 years, say 1 to 3. You know what I mean? Once you scale up, and again, like you said, these are conversations you should be having from the get-go, because there's no point in this becoming an afterthought. Your packaging, your design, these the outer carton. These are conversations you should be having from the beginning when you design your product. Again, and I know that we're not really having an engineering conversation here, but you had touched on it when you're designing a product, right? And you haven't thought about the packaging at all, and in your mind you're thinking, oh well, packaging is just the pretty component that it sits in so that but it'll look pretty on a shelf and people want to buy it. No. You know what I mean? If you don't understand your packaging and it doesn't work with the product you formulated, you know what I mean? You're running into another whole, level of problems.
Yeah.
From a lab standpoint, I don't know if you want to react to that.
Yeah, it is literally that, and it's small nuances of thinking again. Where is your product going to be in 5 years versus where you are now? So, like with packaging, you could have a crash lock, which is really quick to assemble, can be done by a machine, versus like a tut lid, which is then quite difficult. Well, not difficult, but can be a slower process. I think because most founders really are kind of project engineers, they're inventors, and they're thinking purely on a product level and not on a business level. And I mean that's the fundamental difference, is that they're thinking about the product that could be made on their table, and they're putting all their love and ingenuity into it. And they're not thinking about, okay, someone I don't even know in 5 years' time is going to be making this on a factory line somewhere, and I want to make 100,000. But you need to make those decisions early on, because otherwise you end up with a product that you then have to spend a lot of time and money reverse engineering to get back to where you need to be at a time when you won't have the time to do it, because you'll have pressures, retailer pressures, distribution pressures, and you'll be trying to like scrabble around and sort of fix something that you should have done or could have done much earlier on. So it's very much like if you were a boat going across the ocean, you get the angle right at the start. If you have a slight wrong angle at the start, you could end up in a completely different country. It's all about early stage decisions. And the good thing is for founders as well, the early stage decisions generally are free. It just requires a bit of thought and time. Late stage decisions are never free. They always come with big costs.
And listen, like you said, if you're starting in with the wrong assumption, if your math is off, because when you scale, there's math involved. A new launch versus a scale changes the math.
Yeah.
And I just find that so many founders they don't know where to start. They don't know how to have. They don't even know where to start with the pricing conversation. They go out, they look at what their competitors are selling for. But the dead honest truth is you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. You don't know how your competitors came to those prices. And then you also have you have the ability, you have buying power when you're at scale.
Yeah.
So all of these things need to be taken into account. And you know what I mean? So what is the strategy that you think a new founder, right, should be taking into account? Because we're starting from scratch, right? They're about to launch, but I want them to start thinking 5 years from now too. I know that everything is about the launch and everything has gone into this launch, but I want you to start putting your head in the future. And you need to start building a strategy now. What does your scale up look like? Where are you now? And what happens in between? So, I'll throw that at you, Kev.
Yeah, you need to. I suppose you need to look at the market. You need to know, yeah, where you're going, what you're competing with, and understand how you're competing with those people. So, to your point about buying power, if you take someone like The Ordinary, they sell great products at cheap prices. But The Ordinary are now part of obviously a massive company. But even before that, they were one of like multiple companies of Deciem. So they effectively could price discount to reach those prices. So people who are going, well, I'm going to make a product similar to The Ordinary, who try and do a similar product, you're not in the same competition. You can't compete on that right level because effectively you're competing against someone that can make a loss and not necessarily feel it.
Mm,
So you need to have a strategy of being very aware of what the market is, what you're going into, so you don't overprice to start with. But you also need to be very aware of what your own budget is, what your own money is, and how much resource you've got. You can't win a fight against someone who's a sort of 200-pound bruiser because you're not going to win that. So you need a point of difference, and you need that unique point of difference more so than necessarily a price difference. You need to be able to have something that's better value for a similar price. And that's kind of a key. And most founders will be coming, well, I'm coming to the market with this, and that's why. But when a shopper goes into a shop, when a consumer's there, they don't think about, oh, I wonder what batch size that was, or I wonder how long it took them to develop that. They see 9.99, 8.99 similar product. And that's how they make their purchasing decision, unless there's something else to back it up, unless there's a unique USP, unless there's other reasons behind it. Maybe there's a community, maybe there's more marketing, however, the messaging, and those need to be aligned too. But fundamentally, your marketing, your messaging, and everything else isn't going to make any difference if your pricing is completely out.
absolutely. And I mean, that's one of the other things that rubs me the wrong way when it comes to a lot of these content creators, and especially like, those influencers who will say a whole lot of things about a brand, right? Rip a brand to pieces, find dupes. You know what I mean? It's like you don't know the nuances. You don't know what it took to get to the point where the brand is selling at that age. Everybody loves to create a villain, right? And who becomes the villain? Prestige. Prestige is always the easiest villain. Why? Because they charge too much money. How dare they? You know what I'm saying? If they use cheaper packaging, you know what I mean, you would be paying $30, $40 less per product. And it doesn't work that way. Do you know what I'm saying? And
It
it
doesn't.
frustrates me like nothing on earth. Go ahead.
It's because consumers generally don't understand. They just see an end price and they don't necessarily see everything behind that. So if a product's $100 in store, then the reality is that retailer's probably buying it around the $50 mark from a distributor who's probably selling it to them for about $25. And that distributor is maybe buying it from a manufacturer or another retailer about $12. And that person there is making it for probably, around $6 or $5. And so the consumer goes, well, you charge me $100. It's a $5 product. Well, actually, no. There's all of those stages in between, all of that overhead of all of those companies
Yeah.
and profit. You have to make a profit. That's the point of business. But they all have their own separate, there's the drivers who are driving the products around. There's the people who are doing the testing, the people that are making it, the people that are selling it, the buildings, the electricity, everything of that whole distribution chain, which could be a global distribution chain, and most likely is in this day and age, goes into that final pricing. And so when you go, well, it's a crazy price, it's £100, but the ingredients only cost this. It's taken a very small sliver of a much wider reality.
Mm.
It's just because people they just don't know what goes behind the product pricing.
No, no.
Um,
And they're also relying on what they hear, you know what I mean, on
yeah,
social media, wherever they get their information, and they're believing what they're hearing because people tend to believe those who speak with authority, even if they're speaking complete garbage. You know what I
yes,
mean? They
very
they
true.
sound like they know what they're saying, and because you don't know better, you're going to believe it. But you know what? I want to carry on the conversation with channels. Like we started talking about,
Yeah,
retailers, marketplaces. So bring this to the American market for a second here, because the channel math like as we start going into it is completely unforgiving. You know, a brand that wholesales into prestige retail, okay, because I brought prestige up a second ago. Okay, so they
Yeah.
typically sh sell, I can't speak. They typically ship at half the retail price, right? And that's before trade spend, you know, in-store support freight, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
You know, and the new retail marketplaces take such a chunk in fees. And I don't think a lot of founders really understand that. The direct to consumer, right? Your D2C, you know, that looks terrific on paper because you've got those gross margins that look so good on paper. But what I think the people don't account for is that you have to acquire the consumer, right? And you have to
Hmm.
fulfill those orders. And that costs. There's math involved there. So, you know, the retail price, you know, a founder sets on day one, right, has to survive the channels they haven't even entered yet, if
Yes.
that makes
And they
sense,
need to
right?
price it that way right from the start. Because
Correct.
if they price it wrong, there won't be enough cash available to enter those channels.
Yeah. So then how should the channels they intend to grow in shape their pricing?
So there are two ways of approaching pricing. The first way is kind of a cost plus. You look at your cost of goods, and then you look at the various channel markups and the mathematics of the channel to work out what your end consumer would be, the end pricing would be. Or target pricing. Obviously, you look at what the market is paying, especially if it's quite a competitive market, and then working back. Typically, a retailer's on about 50% margin, so they're doubling twice markup. And a distributor in skincare is between 40 and 50% margin, that kind of area. So you're kind of going like half and then half again. But, and there's always a big but, a retailer will also want to discount. You know, you'll see 25% off on Black Friday and things like this. So they don't take that discount, you pay that discount as the brand. So you need to factor that discount, that margin, that marketing spend in as well. There may be another 10% marketing spend as well that the retailer will want. Because I think a lot of founders, and I've made this mistake myself as well, are thinking that once I get to retail, I've made it. I can relax. I can go and have my laptop lifestyle and drink pina coladas, but it doesn't work. Once
Oh
you're on a
God,
shelf,
no.
you've got to stay on that shelf. And that means spending even more money because the retailer wants you to drive people into the store. Just being on a shelf doesn't sell product. So
No.
you need to factor that marketing money in as well. So you need so your cost here, 25% of what they're 50% what they're going to take off. Then they want another 25% for discounts, promotions, probably another 10% for margin spend. So all of a sudden, your margin is significantly smaller than it was. And then if you're doing for a distributor again, you've got half again. So your price margin down there. So when you do it on like the reverse way, you can end up in a scenario where you go, I can't possibly manufacture for that, or if I do manufacture for that, it's going to be a tiny profit. And then it comes down to, well, what's your route to market on that tiny profit? Is it going to work? And you don't have to spend much. You can sort of game theory it out before you've even got going. That okay, I can't go into retail when I start. I need to build my brand. I need to build a war chest of cash so that I can get my volume up because my manufacturers tells me if my volume goes up, my price goes down. And then there's a simple, well, say simple calculation, a reasonably simple calculation of knowing when my volume's this, my price is this, and when I go to retail, I have to have this price. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And I think a lot of brands fall into that trap and they get into retail and they have great products and they get selected and they go on the shelf and then they go bust
Uh-huh.
because they just haven't got that setup set from the get go. And life's hard and life's a struggle.
Yeah.
Um, and it is planning and there's no real mystery there. It's always been there. It's just a case I suppose of knowledge. I suppose no one teaches you this. I suppose you have to
No,
learn it the
no,
hard way. That's really it.
absolutely, which is
Um,
exactly why we're having this conversation,
yeah,
you
because it
know?
is. You don't know until you're there, I suppose. And it's the
Hmm.
same with pure plays. So like and marketplaces. So like Amazon. When my business started, we were direct to consumer, and we sold into Amazon UK, and we did really well for a while. And then obviously on Amazon, you have your listing fee and then your product, and you think, oh, this is great. We sold a product for about £15. It cost us about £4 to make. It was okay, but then you've got to pay sponsors ads. You've got to put money behind your brand. You've got to push it, and all of a sudden. you realize actually my £15, I'm only making £2 here because the sort of difference between the £13 and the £4, that money there, that's going to be Jeff Bezos's rocket fuel. So that can all go up and send him into space because I'm paying for that. And all of a sudden, my margin is tiny.
Yeah.
And then it
Yeah.
comes down to a game of, okay, can I take a small margin because my volume's high enough and I can live that? But there's a real danger then becoming what we call in England busy fools, because effectively you're just burning through inventory and not really
Yeah.
gaining any money, not gaining any
No.
traction.
No. No.
And that's kind of what happened to my business in the early years. We were selling salicylic acid on Amazon. It was going really well. And we had quite, we were like number one and number two on the Amazon charts there, but we were just burning through inventory. And we were just literally plowing through stock and not really making any money.
Mm.
And that was because our pricing was wrong right at the start, because we hadn't factored in, the costs seem to get bigger as well as your volume goes up, costs get bigger, and then you only need start getting competitive with other people. You only need a new entrant to enter the market, and all of a sudden, everything you've worked out on costs can go out the window because then you're in a price war,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it gets really complex.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? This is actually a good segue because I want to talk to you about repricing because
Yeah,
this is another trap. You know, when you find yourself in a situation where you're forced to reprice, right? Because the
yeah,
math isn't working anymore, you're kind of facing an ugly choice. You know what I mean? As a brand. Um, Raising a price after launch risks the customers you have, right?
yeah,
But discounting it also trains the customers to wait for a sale. And
yeah,
that can be just as bad, right?
yeah,
So
exactly.
so from your experiences, is there a graceful way out of a mispriced launch, or is it just, is the only prevention, is the only cure prevention, if you know what I mean?
There are ways, and there are people that have done it. Um, so prevention is always better than cure. You just don't want to get in this situation. But if you are in that situation, there are ways. Discounting doesn't really help because effectively all you're doing is eating your own margin. You're cannibalizing yourself, and you can only discount so far. So that isn't really a solution. If you're overpriced, you're overpriced. And if you've priced wrong and you're underpriced and you want to increase that price, then just increasing it because with no explanation, no context, like you say, is going to alienate everyone who's bought your product to date. And people, world of social media, everyone talks, and that could just equally pull your brand down. And that could be the end of it as well. So it's a very difficult position to be in. Personally, I feel the secret is not to adjust your price. You might want to, if you have to increase, you have to increase it, but you have to do it in context. And that context is value. So if I take some examples like big brands that have done this, so I can do a few actually. So if we take Olay, yeah. So
Mhm.
Olay in the UK used to be called Oil of Olay, and it was for your mum and your auntie, and it was like a dollar store product, and it was what your mum and auntie used to put on, and no one would ever go there.
Yep,
So
I can still smell it on my grandma's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
shelf. Hmm.
So, but Olay, they were in this kind of discount store era, but they didn't want to be there. So what they did is they basically reinvented themselves as Regenivist, Olay Regenivist. And what they did is, expensive packaging. They lent into the clinicals. They lent into the formulation. They lent into the science, and they rebranded themselves effectively as a prestige or mass. Well, they created masstige product, and they distanced themselves from the earlier kind of discount store products. And by doing so, they were able to charge a higher price for effectively the same product without, without having context. Because, that looks worth it. That's worth the money. And it's not that dollar store stuff. And what they did also is they stopped working with all the discounters. So by doing that, so they did it. And then another example would be, say, Apple. So Apple back in the 90s or
Mm.
wherever, the Apple Mac, the Macintosh before it was the Mac, was
Uh-huh.
just like another computer, really. But then they had that whole campaign of it's a lifestyle. They brought out the Macs. This is showing my age, but it had the beautiful colored backs and everything else. And they looked really cool at the time. Again, same computer, reinvented, but given context and a higher price. Starbucks. So Starbucks basically were just a coffee shop, and then they reinvented themselves as the third room, I think, or the third place they called themselves, the place
Hmm.
between work and the office. and again gave some
It's the
context and
experience.
increased their
Yeah,
pricing. Yeah.
yeah,
And that's a value, and it's
yeah,
about
yeah,
providing more value,
yeah.
not necessarily playing with your price, and certainly not going down. And if you're going up, giving it context. And that's probably the only way to get out of it, but you really don't want to be there. It's better to have that value baked in right at the start and your pricing sorted right at the start. And then you never have to have that kind of difficult, because all of those solutions require money as well. So any kind of repackaging, any kind of rebranding, any kind of repositioning is going to require educational marketing and placement. And that, marketing costs a lot of money. So you're better off doing it early rather than late.
Yeah, yeah. So okay, so I want to carry on down this road of the roadmap, because basically what we're trying to do here is to give our founders, investors, a roadmap. At least, I can't tell you where to drive, but I'll at least show you where the bumps are in the road, right? So I want to talk about launch COGs versus target COGs. So Kevin, here's my question to you. How does a founder actually build a target cost of goods? And I think this might sound a bit redundant because we've touched on so much of this back and forth, but I want to actually, ask you the question directly. What should they be asking their manufacturer, you? And at what volumes? What does that conversation sound like when you have that client in front of you?
So fundamentally, they need to know the initial minimum viable product cost. That's their starting cost. And that's just to qualify the product, to get them launched. But they also need, in that initial conversations of here's my product, who we're developing it, they need to know in their head what the market will support. Because there's no point developing it if it's going to go above that, unless there's a great value and a great USP to it that would justify it. But assuming that it's a competitive market they're entering and it's not going to be that different, they need to know really what the market will support. And then they need to talk with their manufacturer and understand, and they be really clear about, we need to get to that point, and you need to say, what do we need to do with this product to reach that point? Now, as us, here, we're contract developers. There are lots of contract developers all over the world. We see this all the time. It's what we do. It's our bread and butter. And we're really well placed to be able to say to you, right, well, what you've got isn't going to scale. You need to change this. You need to change that. And if you do this, this, and this, these are the kind of numbers you would hit. Because we have access to the figures. We know from our suppliers what those costs are going to be. And we can take the guesswork out of it. And it's more about being in a partnership with your manufacturer, rather than just contracting with your manufacturer, because the manufacturer isn't just someone who's got a load of machines and can fill bottles. They've got expertise, they've got knowledge, they've got skill, and they know the journey you're going to go on because they've seen it 1,000 times.
Kevin,
So it's
I'm just
asking
gonna
those
quickly
questions.
interrupt you because you've said something that I cannot emphasize enough, and that is that your contract manufacturer. So for everyone listening, watching this, your contract manufacturer is your partner. They're not a vendor, because
Exactly that.
without them, right? And I'm sorry, Kevin, I had to emphasize that. I say this ad nauseum, but it's the truth. You cannot treat your contract manufacturer like a vendor. You have to treat them like a brand partner. Sorry, I interrupted you. Carry on.
It's exactly that. And like any partner, you have to make sure they're the right partner as well. So that those early conversations are about them assessing you, you assessing them. It's about knowing that you can both go on this journey together, and so halfway along, one of you is not going to just disappear for whatever reason. It is a complete partnership in that respect. But they do have the experience, they have the knowledge to be able to tell you, this is the journey you're going to go on. But we're not mind readers. You need to say to us, this is the journey you want to go on. Not every founder wants to be in Sephora. Some have, visions of world domination. Others just want to have a family business and just make a living. So knowing that journey allows you to know the plan and how your metrics will change to reach that plan. And there's lots of things, early on, as I say, there's things within product development, there's things within formulation. So some key ones would be, if you're making a cosmetic product and you're choosing an ingredient that's so rare, it could be some alpine herb that only grows on the eastern face of the host mountain. It may be a great product, but your supply chain's at risk, because if the supplier of that product disappears or it's seasonal, as you sometimes get, you may not be able to sell that product anymore in the future. And all the money you've put into building that brand around that product suddenly disappears overnight. And we've seen that a few times.
Oh, yes.
Um, yeah, it can, and it's things like as well the size of the bottle, which sounds really bizarre, but and founders never seem to really understand it. And often it's the cheaper, bigger products that are harder to price than the smaller, more expensive products. Smaller, more expensive products, a lot more margins. Moisturizers, serums, much easier, more forgiving on price. Cheaper products like cleansers, toners, really tricky. Cleansers and toners generally retail around a sort of $10 to $20 mark, which means when you work all your metrics back, you're about the $1 to $2 mark. But the problem with that is that cleansers and toners normally are about 100 mil up to sort of 250 mil, somewhere around there. So you've got a lot of product for very little cost. So a lot of people go, I want to make a range, make a cleanser, but there's no way with their scaling, with their budget, they're ever going to be able to compete with a drugstore cleanser. It's just you need to be like a very, very big company with a lot of sales already. And you need to be making in the tons and not the tens of liters.
Mm.
And that decision early on can save you a lot of trouble and a lot of time. And it's a really specific case, but it really can make a lot of difference because selecting your bottle size really affects your money. So the most expensive part of your product, a lot of people say, oh, the most expensive part is the packaging. At scale, it's not. The most expensive part of your product is the product. And if you've got a 100 ml bottle or you've got an 80 ml bottle, that's a 20% difference in your cost of goods, which affects you as you go. But a consumer may not notice a difference between an 80 ml and a 100 ml. They may not care. Your margin will care as you scale. And those kind of decisions are what a contract manufacturer or any kind of manufacturer developer can tell you early on will
Mm-hmm.
save you a lot of headaches as you go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean that is having a good partner, right? That is because you look out for each other. So talking of good partners, what should a manufacturer be telling founders that the founders wouldn't think to ask? I know that's kind of sounds like an odd question, but
No, 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 I get it. Realistically, they should be telling founders a spread of costs. So not just the amount of product that the founders asked for. Because not every founder, but a large proportion of founders come with no real idea. They don't know how many they're going to sell, and they're choosing their number based on their bank balance and funds rather than what the business is going to need. So they don't ask. And if you don't ask, you don't get. So no one's going to just volunteer it because it's work. If you ask our team here to calculate 10, 50, 100,000, all that's work we have to do. If you're not asking what those are, we're not going to do that work because we don't know your journey.
Mhm.
So that's pretty much a key one. Then the other ones I'd be asking is about, can this product scale? What if I scale this product, what is going to happen? And then you might find, well, they go, well, you've got a really, like I say, rare peptide or some rare ingredient in there. If you scale that, the pricing isn't going to change, and we might struggle to get hold of it. And you'll know this as well in the kind of like formulation stages. Some ingredients are really difficult to get hold of, and if they're difficult to get hold of samples, you don't want to be in a position where it's difficult to get hold of material for manufacture because
Mhm.
that manufacturer, the
Mhm.
supplier, is a bit
Mhm.
flaky.
Mhm.
So those decisions early on, designing for scale at the start, will make your life easier and pay dividends down the road.
Mhm. Mhm. And it's
And
the
it's
same
just a
with
case of asking.
uh-huh. No, absolutely. And it's the same with packaging, Kevin. It's like I'll see people get this absolutely gorgeous packaging, right? And with beautiful stoppers and it just looks like a piece of art. And I'm thinking, okay, what's going to happen when your MOQ is more than 100 pieces? Because first
Yeah,
of all, those things are custom made, right? So who's making them? Where are they coming from? What are you facing? Chinese New Year? Do you know what I'm saying? Like you have to if that's your brand and that's the direction you're going, you need to plan in advance, right? You need to make sure that not only have you planned to have your rare ingredients in a warehouse in advance, right? And all of that's going to add to your upfront costs, right?
Exactly that.
Because
Yeah.
what you're trying to avoid is falling down the stairs later on. So, you know what I mean? You're putting up safe guardrails, right?
Yeah, exactly. And anything that you do early on that's manual is going to come back to haunt you later on when you scale.
Yeah.
So we had one customer who put on every bottle they had a wax seal, individually done, which was it
Ouch.
looked beautiful. It was unique. Every product
Hmm.
was unique. I could see the USP. To scale that is impossible. So because there's no way realistically without building a specialized machine of doing that for every bottle.
Hmm.
Um, and then, so if that becomes part of your USP, as you scale, it disappears from the product. And
Hmm.
then everyone moans, oh, they
Yeah.
don't do that anymore. It's
Yeah.
not as good
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
And you all of a sudden you've lost some value for something that you designed in that couldn't scale.
Yeah. And I mean that's to your exact point. That's another conversation that I don't think enters especially in a new founder's mind is the idea that they may land up having to have a tooling conversation. If
Yeah.
you've got something that is a little different than the norm, and you can have it for many reasons. I mean, you maybe it's your, you want to be undupable or whatever it is that you're trying to set yourself apart. You know what I mean? Tooling can become expensive. And I know that the upside with tooling is that it's usually a one-off price. But I want to talk to you more about that because, that is really a manufacturer conversation. So talk to me about tooling and how that affects you now today versus how that's going to affect you later on down the line. And is this a conversation that you should be having at the same time as you're having your packaging conversation?
So yeah, so tooling is good. We have some products, maybe unique tools. It's good and it's bad. One, like you say, is a tool typically is depending on what you're tooling, can be anywhere from about 1,500 to say $20,000, depending on what it is. If it's plastic, it's generally higher. Glass, surprisingly, a little bit lower, but it's there's a cost there that you have to pay up front, and that's going to eat into the money you've got available to launch your product. So think about whether you need the tool from the money point of view. Also, there is a huge, like almost infinite range of glassware, plastic bottles, lids available in the world. And you have to ask yourself, do you really need a tool or do you just need to spend a bit more time finding what's perfect? Because if you go on Alibaba, pretty much find any shape thing that you want, unless you're specifically modifying it to maybe put an emboss of your brand or something like this. You have to ask yourself, do I need the tool? Do I need to spend the money or am I just being a bit vain? Um, then there comes a risk with tooling that people don't think about is that if you get a tool with a manufacturer and you're all getting on great and they manufacture for and life's lovely, then it's fine. Then the moment you want to move, maybe their costs are too high, maybe the management has changed, maybe the company's bought out, maybe there's some world change. Then you want to move it. You now need to get your tool from that manufacturer and give it to someone else. If that tool's in China, that's a very difficult thing to do, especially if you're not on good terms with the manufacturer, because they're looking at it. Well, I paid for the tool, I kept the tool. No, come and get the tool. And they what Chinese people, they're lovely people, and they may not even say no. They might say, yeah, of course, tomorrow, and you may never get your tool, and then you're faced with having to retool again, and the delay and the hassle of that. So
Cost.
that's yeah, and the cost, and that's the risk of tooling is
Yeah.
that when you go for a tool, you're going to have a lot of cost, and you're going to be tied to that manufacturer for a while. So you want to make sure that again, that manufacturer is someone you want to be tied to for a while. And you may not even be in that chain because you may come to a contract developer like us and you go, I want to have a tool ball, I want this, that. And we would go to one of our manufacturers and do the tooling. So you may not even be in the chain of that, and you may not even be able to control that risk.
Mm.
And so that's what comes of it. But then on the flip side, of course, you need your product to be unique, and tooling can give that. But like I said at the start, there are so many bottles in the world. Like there's an infinite number of bottles in the world. Do you really need to have a tool at all?
Mhm, mhm. And there was something that you had said in that post that you put on LinkedIn that just it made me smile. But just in that, yes, God, I've heard this a million times. Like, I really wish people would pay more attention. People, you're probably not going to make life-changing money from your first production run.
Exactly
So
that. Yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, the difference between being able to swallow your pride and and scale versus just, brands that stall because founders just get in their own way.
Yeah, yeah. Social media plays a huge part in this, in that we only ever see people's highlights and not what's behind the scenes. And I think not all founders, but a lot of founders have a dream about, yeah, I'll be exactly where I want to be in 1 year, 2 year, 3 years time. It's all going to go smoothly. And they have this sort of perfect curve when reality we all know is actually more like this. Um,
Hmm.
and it can be difficult to do, especially if we bring back the pricing. It's like there is pride in your products. This it becomes part of you as a I've made lots of products. They become a little bit a part of you. You put them out into the world, and I made that. I made those decisions. This is really an expression of me in some way. To have someone come along and go, it's not worth what you put, is quite hard to swallow because it becomes very personal. So if you go to a retailer and you say it's £50, and the retailer's like, I can't, you won't sell. Yeah, you could £20. Then you're like, a lot of founders will get in their own way because they're like, well, no, forget them. I'm not going to, that's the price. I'm not going to budge. And then their business can stall on that because of it's not ego, but it's just pride.
Hmm.
Um, and that can be a real risk. Yeah, a lot of founders can be in their own way. It's kind of what makes them a founder in the first
Hmm.
place. It's
Hmm.
kind of a benefit, but at the same time, it can be a negative because it can just blinker on regardless. The same with pricing, same with launching, same with products. Sometimes the wheels of the bus can be coming off, but the founder's so blinkered that they refuse to acknowledge it. And that, as I say, it can be a plus because sometimes the wheels of the bus just look like they're going to come off, but they don't. And that's pretty much most startups. But
Mm.
for sometimes the wheels do fall off. So
Yeah.
it's both a curse and a gift, I
Yeah.
think,
You know what?
pride. Um,
That conversation was actually a conversation I'd had with somebody else a while ago for that exact reason, for exactly everything you just laid out. Sometimes a founder needs to understand that they're a founder and that what they do is different than trying to run a business. You know what I mean? So in cases like that, maybe the answer is to actually look for a CEO because not all founders can be CEOs. Those are very different things. CEOs
yeah,
are report to a board. You know what I mean? CEOs are you basically, they're an a C-suite employee that you hire to keep your the wheels on the bus, right?
yeah.
But it's look, I mean, some founders do a great job running companies, but I've found for the most part, founders being the creative, imaginaries that they are, it kind of clashes when it comes to actually running the business. But
It really can. It's a bit like asking your kids to drive you in the car. It's like they can do it, but you're just all nerves all the time. I think but that's all part of I think of running a business. As you scale, you have to let little bits go, let little bits
yeah.
go, and that's quite hard. There are chunks of it, and I think going from the all-encompassing leader, as it were, to letting someone else not so much lead but run it, it's quite a
Hmm.
hard step back
Hmm.
for a lot of people,
Yeah.
um, because it's literally like letting your son drive your car. Like, are they going to crash it? They're going to crash it. I can't look. It's that kind of faith to do it. But you're quite right. Not everyone. There's no real training for it. There's no
No,
real. It's a
no.
thing you learn,
Yeah. No,
and some people
absolutely.
do well and some people don't, and
Mm,
it's hard. And yeah, and knowing when is the right time, if you're doing it right or wrong, is a hard thing to judge as
yeah.
well.
Yeah.
um
And also if it's so emotional, it becomes so emotional. And it's like I'm always saying to people, this is your business, not your baby. And I know it feels like your baby. And I know that, you don't want people calling your baby ugly, but it's your business, right? It
yeah,
it serves a
it's a
different purpose. So
it's a good
sometimes,
analogy though. The
mhm,
baby analogy is very good because when your business starts, it is like a baby. You have to do
mhm,
everything for it and look after it, but obviously
mhm.
like a baby, it grows up. And I
Yeah.
think as your baby becomes a preteen and a teenager and older, you have to step back more and more and more. And I think
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
that process is the tricky process.
Hmm. Hmm. And the emotion that's attached to it.
Yeah,
Do you know what I'm saying? But
yeah,
anyway, so Kevin, before we close here, I want to bring this back to the practical because everything we've discussed, you know, we've talked about a lot, but it all compounds. You know, you got the first quote becomes the anchor. The anchor becomes the
yeah,
shelf price. The shelf price meets the channel math. Oi. And by the time, the founder feels that squeeze, the options are narrower and the costs are higher. So
yeah.
for those founders listening today and or watching today, who realize, their product is already, I don't know, mispriced, too high to gain traction, too low to survive their channels. What's the first thing they should do this week to start, fixing that or finding a solution for that kind of issue?
So really, knowledge is power. So they know their price is high. The first thing they need to do is know, why is my price so high? Is it high because my cost of goods is high? Is it high because my operating costs are high? Um, is it high because I'm too proud? Is it high because we've just priced it on a metric that doesn't is not relative? Um, so it's really understanding why it's high. That's the first step I would do. And then I would understand, where does it really need to be?
Hmm.
So if I'm at $50, but actually everyone else is at $30 or $40, then it might even be $45. It could be a slight difference and no one's buying. Then understanding this is why it's high, this is what it needs to be. That then kind of starts to give you a roadmap of, right, these are the things I really need to address to start my product to get some traction, to make it attractive to people to buy. And without understanding those factors, which obviously are, you need to break each down into the little bits, um, you're not going to change, and, your business will, on that product at least, will stall, and you'll end up be sat on lots of stock, trying to sell it in like a yard sale and all the rest of it. So it's understanding, right, why is it high, where does it need to be, and then what can I do to make it where it needs to be. And it may be
Okay.
that I have to add value. It may be that I have to reduce the price of my manufacturing and my retail price.
Hmm.
It may be that
Hmm.
actually I need to get out of my own way. It could be any of
Hmm.
those or more
Yeah, yeah.
factors.
Listen, I think it also can start with having a conversation with your CM. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially if you're with a CDMO who has the lab there as well, and you're doing it, all in, one shop, that just maybe make an appointment, sit down with your CM and start having a costing conversation. Okay, so now for founders who haven't launched yet, okay?
Okay.
They're still choosing their formulation. They're at the very beginning, packaging, they're looking for their manufacturer. What are the 2 or 3 pricing decisions they should get right at this point?
Right. Start. So um, the first isn't a pricing decision. The first is this scalable? Can I make 100,000 of these? And if not, why not? So that should be the first thing they should consider. If I want to make 100,000, what would go wrong? And then they need to start looking at, uh, where does the price sit again? Where do I need to sit? And then work that back to, what do I need to buy it at? And then speaking to the contract manufacturer saying, right, here's my product. This is the price I need to hit, but this is a product I'm kind of benchmarking against. So I can't just cut everything out, because I won't be benchmarked to that product. I would just be a cream and some oil and some water. So I need to have these actives and these ingredients in, but I need to hit this price. What do I need to do that? And then if your contract manufacturer is any good, they'll turn around and say, well, you're going to need the volume, and to get the volume, you're going to need to do this. And then you can then start mapping out your future of your product based on the information they're telling you. And you'll have a roadmap rather than a surprise journey. So I think
Hmm.
those are the key things. And it's, as we said earlier, it's a partnership. It's about adjusting your product so it's scalable right at the start, and not having things in there that can't scale.
No,
I
of
think
course. I
that's
mean,
the key.
it's yeah, no, 100%. I mean, everything that you've just said is exactly that. And again, just to emphasize, choose a partner, don't choose a vendor. But okay, so now moving on to the investors in the audience, right? Is pricing discipline a signal that can actually be diligenced pre-investment? So, and if it can, what questions expose whether a founder understands the difference between their launch cost and their real cost? Because remember, we spoke about that earlier. So
Hmm.
this is specifically for investors looking to give this new founder, an injection of funds. And is that pre-investment diligence, diligenceable, if that's
I
a word?
I think it is. Yeah, I think you need to, as an investor, say to the founder, okay, here's your predicted sales, but hopefully not a hockey stick, but here's your predicted sales going on. Uh, and here's your predicted profit you're going to make. Why? This is the question. Why is your price dropping? And why are those figures those figures? So you're saying, in year one, this is our cost of goods, this is our sales. Year two, this is our cost of goods, this is our sales. If the founder doesn't have changing costs of goods, it means they've not even addressed that. If they've just got that one cost of goods and it's like year one, 1 million sales, year two, 2 million sales, but the cost of goods hasn't changed, it says to me that they've not done enough due diligence in what their roadmap's going to be. And the likely is they're come unstuck because it may not be scalable. So
Hmm.
it's not just looking at the kind of money coming in, but the money going out and saying, what will your price be like as you scale? And have you considered that? And why? So if you've just dropped it by 40 cents every year on year, why? Because it's unlikely that's accurate.
No.
It'll drop in big chunks and stages as your volume goes, and you'll be able to see that. So it would be a good sign of that someone has a plan rather than they've
Hmm.
just gone onto a spreadsheet and put a formula
Hmm.
in where it's a soft decrease.
Okay, so speaking of spreadsheets, I have one last question for you. So you ended that LinkedIn post that I mentioned earlier, with a question I think that every founder should literally tape above their desk. And that is, does this price help me scale, or does it just make my spreadsheet feel better? So give us your final word. How does a founder learn to answer that truthfully?
It comes from research and facts. It means not just making a model and assuming that's real life. It means going into real life, getting the data, asking the questions, finding the right partners, finding a manufacturing partner that is willing to kind of get into the weeds with you with it, because not every manufacturer will want to do that, because it raises uncomfortable questions in terms of margins and everything else. So it's about finding the right partner as well, um, and literally looking at, right, is this price I've got realistic now, and is it going to be realistic later, or am I going to scale and fail? Because I haven't done my due diligence and my homework.
Hmm. hmm Okay, so in closing, I'm going to say this. Pricing is not a spreadsheet exercise. So, what Kevin laid out today is a discipline, it's not a formula. Know which number you're looking at, launch cost or real cost, and benchmark the shelf, not just the spreadsheet. Ask your manufacturer what the product costs at volume before you decide what it costs the customer. Build the margin roadmap before you need it and accept that the first run is for proving demand, not for printing money. Your launch cost is not your destiny, it is your starting point. And as the founder, your job is to get to the volume that changes the math. Kevin, I can't thank you enough for being with me today and for bringing your perspective to this conversation because founders normally have this kind of conversation alone with their spreadsheets. They don't really get to have these kinds of conversations. And hopefully, after everything that we've spoken about today, they're going to look at their contract manufacturer a little differently. And for everyone watching or listening, as always, if you found this conversation valuable, which I have no doubt you did, please like it, share it, and subscribe. And the interview series is now also available on Substack. If you want to read this or any of the past interviews in written form, And, especially if, as I can imagine, you wanted to take notes, there was a lot of good stuff here. So go on to Substack, you'll see it written there, and I don't know, print it out and highlight it and keep the notes. Of course, you can always follow me and Kevin on LinkedIn, where we share more expert insights on the issues and answers that drive smarter beauty investment. I am Melory Johnson. Thank you for watching and listening, and I will see you all next time.